Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Leading Lights interview. My name is Will Smith. I am CMI's Public Affairs Manager. As you may be aware, next year is CMI's 75th anniversary, and to mark the occasion, we are running this series of interviews with inspirational leaders to kind of explore what the future of management and leadership is going to look like and how we can make it more fair and inclusive than what has come before. I've got a fantastic guest for you today. I'm delighted to introduce Monica Chadha. Monica is an experienced non-executive director in the data sciences, media, higher education, and not-for-profit sectors. She's a director at Mocha Consultancy. She's an Ashridge trained coach, and more recently, she's also a member of CMI's 75th anniversary advisory council, which is it's a group of extraordinary leaders we're bringing together to explore what the skills and behaviours are which are going to come to define modern management and leadership in the coming decade. So Monica, welcome. I'm delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Will. My goodness me, you have just stroked my ego, and I feel really good about it. Look, I have to apologise to any of the viewers if I cough. Luckily, you're not all in front of me. I've had lateral flow. I'm fine. I think I'm just crawling my way through to Christmas like most people, to be honest. Thank you so much for having me, Will. I have to say, it's been such a delight to join the advisory board and have you be sort of like the three-line whip, actually, and make sure that we're all doing as we need to. And so congratulations to you on being a brilliant public affairs manager and managing us so well.
Fantastic. Monica, you're clearly delirious with that cold for that compliment.
Please, don't even try that.
So before we get into the questions, I'm going to do two quick pieces of housekeeping. Please, if you have any kind of questions or comments as we go through, do drop them into the chat and I will try to pick up as many as we can. Although we have a lot of questions to get through, so please forgive me if we don't make all of them. And if you are not already a member of CMI but would like to keep up to date with future Leading Lights interviews and our other activities, there will be a link in the chat below. Please do sign up. It's free and we've got some fantastic content waiting for you. So Monica, if we jump straight into it, I'm going to start with a nice easy question. How important are values, ethics and culture to professional management and leadership, and why?
I suppose actually they've always been really important, by which I mean values are the behaviours you display, whether that is and the rules which you live by, whether that is integrity, transparency, honesty, whatever that may be. But of course, you set the tone for the behaviour. And I often think what you accept is all that you can expect. So I think that actually, in reality, good people have choices, right? I mean, the reality is, I remember somebody saying to me, I was talking about a board role, and somebody said to me, well, actually, Monica, do you want to park your talents there? And I think about that all the way up the sort of food chain. And that is actually, who do you want to work for and why? What do they offer you? And I think actually culture, norms, behaviour, ethics are becoming increasingly more important. I don't think sort of the concept of ethics, unless you've worked for sort of traditional legacy companies, often gets talked about. But now, because of the Industrial Revolution, the fourth Industrial Revolution, actually ethics is becoming a bigger question. For example, if let's just say, for example, you're thinking about driving autonomous cars, when you're thinking about programming that car, or you're sort of thinking about the coding aspect, do you an accident is about to happen? Do you save the children? Do you save the pregnant woman who's potentially carrying, it's two people? Do you save the old people? I mean, these are ethics. These are things to think about. What you do, how you do it, who you serve. And I think that actually, more than ever, companies are coming under scrutiny. And perhaps more so as a result of the pandemic, people are starting to think about, do I really want to work for you? Why I want to be led by you? What do you offer me? How do you behave? when you are seen and when you are unseen. So actually, I think it's really coming to the fore. I'm really excited about that because actually what happens is the people who have lived by those good rules and behaviours and set the standard for others, and almost demand and expect that, to be honest, finally start to get the recognition they deserve. And those that don't have an opportunity to modify and pivot. And if they choose not to, then eventually they get called out. And you've got things like Glassdoor and all these sorts of weird and wonderful tools to shine a floodlight on the good behaviours and the bad, and those that are sort of suggested areas for improvement.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I love your phrase about all you can accept is what you can expect. I think that kind of sums it up beautifully.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, looking back over your experience then, and perhaps particularly drawing on your experience as a coach, how easy is it to teach those principles? And if you perhaps bring a manager or a leader in that doesn't really fit in with your values and ethics, how much of an issue is that?
I suppose I've coached a lot of people over the years from all walks of life, and there is no doubt that I think if people come into coaching because they come into something with an open mind, then they are willing to be persuaded, like a good business argument. In some ways, it can be, as easy as somebody saying, look, I need somebody to just sort of almost spar with. It's almost a blend of sort of coaching and mentoring and business advisory in a sense. And it's not that I think people deliberately set out to misbehave or to sort of pull a fast one over you or to get away with something. But actually just think about who really taught you. Just think about how many people really go into the workplace and understand that behavior, professional sort of, being a professional manager, we've sort of talked about this versus an accidental one. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but actually, if you have a chance to learn properly, surely your inputs determine your outputs. Learning on the job is fabulous. And, I've worked in SMEs and they've been some of the greatest experiences of my career because the bold ambition goes side by side with the constraints in a way that you simply don't have in a large business, because you don't get to roll your sleeve up, you roll your sleeves up and get stuck into everything. That's just not the way it works. But if you are sort of self-taught in a way, there is a danger that you might be limited by your inputs or your learnings. And therefore, I think having other people around you, whether frankly, you are reading, whether you're listening to podcasts, watching videos, or in fact, whether you have a coach, it's really important that I think that you have somebody who is very deliberate, almost about sort of sparring with you to say, how are you thinking about something? So, for example, if I said to you, well, actually, you know what, in 3 years' time, you're going to be the chief executive of CMI. And don't know, I'm not prepared to accept that nod. But let's say reality is actually my job, I think, is partly to think about what is it? Where are you? Where do you want to get to? And how do you get there? And what are the behaviours and the competencies that you need to have in your basket, essentially? And so I think that when you think of it like that, the role of a manager, you start to then realise what is expected of you, how you self-lead, and then how you lead others. And in my view, actually, traits are more difficult, right? From a coaching perspective, if you said to me, I fundamentally don't like people, and believe me, there are lots of people who come to me and say, I'm not really up for managing people. The reality is, being a manager does a number of things. It often unlocks symbolism, it unlocks substance, and it unlocks salary. For a lot of people, salary and symbolism really matter. And absolutely, look, we have ego. Money unlocks, whether you do a house extension, whether you choose to buy a better set of knives and forks, whatever it is that you choose to do and where you spend your money. But in reality, there is often a disconnect between what we expect of our managers, what we crisply articulate, which I think many companies fail to do because they just haven't thought about it. And therefore, I think it is incumbent upon managers to think about what are the leadership values that I need to display to climb and lift others as I do? And that's why I think organisations like the CMI are so important.
Great, perfect. Well, I think that's really interesting. I think, and the point you make about SMEs kind of rings very strong to me, because I think if you're thinking that perhaps if you have 3 leaders within that organisation and one of them doesn't match your culture, that is a third of your leadership.
That's right.
That is kind of off track. So completely makes sense to me. I think the point you just made then about kind of the organisation articulating what it wants from its managers and leaders kind of brings us on to my next question, which was going to be around kind of the friction between continuity and change within organizations. And so we're hearing a lot at the moment about organizations which are on journeys to becoming more fair and inclusive. How do you see that balance? How easy is it to get that balance right when it's perhaps between the traditional way that you've always done things versus what we know are modern kind of inclusive practices?
I suppose the first thing that I think about is that change is a constant, right? And but then I also sort of balance that against, I always remember Jeff Bezos once saying, well, everybody bangs on about what we need to introduce and change, but actually what remains the same? And in truth, what remains safe is that people want to come to work to do a good job. They want to be a part of something that they feel they have contributed to, that they continue to grow, that there is a sense of validation. And I think at the heart of it, actually, at the heart of all of the experiences I've had with coaching is the sense that, will I amount to something in my life? When I get to the end of it, what will it be? And I think a big part of leadership is exciting the human spirit. It really is, because you're taking people on the journey with you. And I think that in a sense, when you think about continuity and change, it's important to understand that most people don't like change unless it benefits them. And so I think that actually one of your trustees, Patrick Dunn, spoke about this. I remember an FT event that I was at, and he said, that, in some countries, I don't like the concept of sort of using East and West, but in some countries, people think more deeply about things before they arrive at their judgments. And I think sometimes in the West, I sometimes think that we arrive at our judgments quite quickly, and we think that's a sign of our intellect and how sharp we are. But it's not, because how many times have you done something or said something or ordered something or watched a movie and actually thought, you know what? I don't know, I just kind of got there a bit too quick. I should have just thought about it a bit more. I think that's true of business. And I think that if you're going to introduce anything, it's really important to think about the intended and the unintended consequences of that. Who do you serve in terms of your stakeholders, your audience, the internality around your people, and the externality, whether that's your suppliers, whether that's your customers, whoever it is, whatever your touch points. And so I think actually being very deliberate and talking to people and mapping perspectives and data points as to what does this mean for you. So it's something very, very simple. Let's say you're looking to move to hybrid working as a permanent way of life. It's very easy for leadership to say, well, actually, that really works for me. It's great, right? I can do 3 days in the office, or 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, and I can see more of the kids and blah, blah, blah. But then what about all of the people that it doesn't work for? And in a sense, I suppose when you're a large organisation, you're required to think more widely and more deeply, because your workforce can really be up in arms simply by sheer strength of numbers. In a smaller organisation, you kind of feel the power sits with you, but in reality it doesn't, because before employees had a job and now they have a voice. And so I think that when I think about continuity and change, you're constantly horizon scanning, thinking about what is coming down the line. Do I disrupt or do I get disrupted? You're looking in your rear view mirror. But I think to the extent that we achieve success through people, before we achieve success through anything, numbers, technology, whatever it may be, it's absolutely important to watch the mission and to watch the very people you expect to walk with you and sometimes in front of you on that continuity and change journey.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, I mean, your comment about looking in the rearview mirror kind of takes us on to my next set of questions, which is around learning from the past. I guess you kind of answered this to a certain extent already, but how important do you think self-reflection and looking backwards are to kind of managers and leaders? And I'll put you on the spot and say, kind of, do you have an example where you've recently looked to the past to solve a recent challenge or hurdle you faced?
No pressure. I'm going to throw it back at you at some point, Will. I'm going to ask you the same question. So you can get your thinking cap on and sweat it while I think about my answer. I suppose, look, I mean, I read history, right? And I can honestly tell you, being a daughter of Indian parents, that my parents were like, they love history. I mean, they actually both really enjoy it, but they're like, it's a really interesting degree because you're not a teacher, you're not an accountant, you're not a lawyer, you're not a doctor. But that's because they couldn't see a path to success. That's because they simply didn't understand the value of looking backwards in order to look forwards. Most things in life are not new, actually. There are very, very few things in life, and certainly through your working career, that have never been done before. And even if they've never been done before, and you're fortunate enough to be part of, let's say, a bold experiment that advances your organisation for the greater good, then the reality is how you learn to think about that is fundamental to how you shape, how you sort of tweak something and adapt it. And I suppose I always think about what's gone before. Somebody asked me yesterday, related to a board discussion. We were talking about quite a difficult issue, and somebody said to me, "Well, Monica, if you come into this discussion, how would you almost sort of arrive in the room, I suppose, because you've got your worldview about something, the chief exec has something else." And it was a great question. And I said, well, look, in a sense, you've got to be in receive mode. You've got to be in listening mode before you're in transmit mode. And you've got to be intentional about gathering or mapping your perspectives and data points. And I talk about this a lot, and my husband jokes, here she goes again, mapping perspectives and data points. But it's the truth, right? Like, the reality is, just because I've got a view about something doesn't necessarily mean that I shouldn't be open to changing my mind. And so I always look backwards. Now, if you think about after the world wars, for example, society, businesses, life was decimated. Companies didn't enter into share buyback schemes. They entered into building back better, building companies. And I still think today, continued professional development and the likes of organisations like the CMI, for those who know about it, lucky them. But actually, it's really important that organisations and leaders individually think about, what do I need to learn? What are my sources of intelligence? How do I learn? But crucially, how do I unlearn? That's really important, right? Because we always talk about what's new, what's exciting, what's sexy. But actually, everything has a window, everything has a period before potentially at some point it gets sort of superseded or something else comes along, technology or whatever it may be. In terms of my own examples, I suppose, the one thing that comes up in coaching quite a lot is imposter syndrome. I prefer not to use the word syndrome because it kind of suggests you have it or you don't. I think of it as phenomenon. And I think that it comes over people, it floats over people at different moments in your career. And I honestly have worked with some outstanding people over the course of my career. And if I was simply to look at them on paper and I were to look at them standing up and talking, I am wowed. I am in awe of all that they have achieved and what they have become. But the absolute point of similarity between all of those people is that there are moments that they feel like they are an imposter. And often, I think that is confused with capability building. Of course, there are moments when you step up into a job where there should be really an important amount of stretch. There should be in every role that you do. If I put you on the spot now, you're going to be thinking, oh my God, this is about me interviewing Monica. She's going to turn it on me. And now I'm thinking, I don't want this on camera. But in reality, the truth of it is that there is always a first time for everything. My friend said to me the other day, there is a first time you indulge in the pleasures of the flesh. There is the first time you start writing. There is the first time that you learn the alphabet. There is the first time somebody says to you, Monica, I'd like you to come and present in a room. There is a first time you join a board. There's a first time for everything. So I actually think that when I look back in my career, I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was terrified about doing things. And I just couldn't believe that somebody like me could be in an environment and asked to basically stand up and own that moment and talk about what I felt. What about if what I felt was wrong? What about if what I felt and I was being judged and all eyes were on me, that I, in that moment, let myself down, or worse, I let other people down? Do you know what? Now I think about, my God, am I failing enough? Am I learning enough from am I making enough mistakes? Because if I'm not putting myself out there, if I'm not doing things that stretch me and advance me, then what is the concept of human growth? Or is it a fallacy? Is it something we talk about because we think in this moment it's acceptable, but actually when it comes to business, you've got to be polished and you know, you've got to arrive and you've got to have done all the media training and blah, blah. I just don't buy it. I think that actually we're works in progress, and by the way, there's no destination, because even if we got there, it changes again. And so in some ways, I suppose before I would be more nervous and terrified. And now yeah, of course, there's always a moment that you think, if I say the wrong thing, but actually, if you're well intended, if you've got a good set of values, then you forgive yourself. And also part of learning to sort of, and leadership, I think, is iterative. Part of learning to be who you are and understanding what you become is absolutely backing yourself. It's forgiving yourself. It's taking a chance on yourself. So I suppose I've moved away from feeling more terrified than supposed moving towards becoming more excited and exhilarated. Actually, if it goes wrong, and there'll be people listening to this talk and they won't like what I have to say, or they won't like the way I say it, and that's okay. Because I can't remember who said it, but it's only you know, one you, because everybody else is taken, or whatever the saying is. So I sort of roll the dice, and that's the way I tend to think about risk taking and my appetite for that.
I love it. That is a perfect answer. I love it. I can just kind of sat here thinking about all the clips we can put on Twitter of you answering that question, because I think it's so inspirational.
So what about you, Will? I mean, come on, tell me, right? Have there been moments, if you look back and you think, because I could go on all day. There's a ton of things I've done with friends, family, work, colleagues that I thought, oh, I wish I'd slightly managed that differently. I wish I'd thought about it. What about you? Are there, and you don't have to make it a work example, but give me an example where you've sort of done the look back and you've done the look forward.
I think you're going to say it's a cop-out, but the one that I had as soon as you told me you were going to ask me the question was exactly that, in terms of kind of looking back and realizing that actually I can do stuff that I would never imagine I could. Before the pandemic, I never used to do these webinars, and that definitely felt outside of my comfort zone.
I mean, you're brilliant at it. And you've really put me at ease. No, you have. And look, I'm one data point, right? And I feel like I'm going to own this and say I think I'm the more important data point. I'm the influential data point here. But the other thing is, you write beautifully. You write stunning papers, and I said that to you. It's a skill that I don't. I mean, you do. And I think it's really interesting when you sort of realise how much you're actually capable of.
Lovely. Great. Well, so not to go on about me too much, let's get back to you. I think let's go back to your point about understanding perspectives and data points, because I think that is something that we can't talk too much about the discussions of the 75th Advisory Council, because we will be publishing next year, so you'll have to tune in then to see what we say. But I think that's a really interesting point about how people are actually driving positive inclusion and thinking about what actually works. And one of the discussions we had, I thought was really interesting, was saying there are companies that are collecting certain data, for example, and they're kind of going through the motions to do it, and in reality it's not telling them anything new, and it's not leading to any kind of interesting action. So if you remember, we were talking about companies perhaps should be looking at publishing how many promotions, for example, of either women or ethnic minority groups, how many disciplinaries and all this kind of stuff, so you could really look into the issues that affect individuals and will have a big impact on their working lives. So I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and kind of more widely just what actions you see as being key to driving that positive action on inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, it's a great question, and I think the first thing is that, you know, disclosures, whether we like it or not, disclosures internally or externally drive behavioural change. I'll give you a great example. I'm not going to name the company, but last night my husband said to me, actually, should we just get a pizza? It's been a really tough day, and we have been talking about something related to some house stuff we're doing. And actually, we just couldn't be asked. We thought, got the pizza, and it said the pizza had arrived, but it hadn't arrived. And it's really interesting because we started talking about, is that driven by KPIs and metrics? Because we know that the company, it's a large company, is under scrutiny and gets penalised, right? So it's really interesting what behavioural change and dynamics, or the sort of fallout from that when you drive particular behaviours, or when you ask somebody to be measured against something like that. And I think that for a lot of people, they roll their eyes at this stuff and they think, oh God, I just don't want to do it, or, you know, it doesn't sort of present me in a particularly good light. Let's say, for example, I had a speaking engagement very recently for a very large American multinational, and it was about inclusion. And there were no people of colour on that call, and it was a large audience. And I wondered, actually, how do they feel? Because the reality is, you've sort of got the CEO at the top of the organisation driving the change, going almost faster than the organisation can. So how do you create the enabling capability? How do you sell that? How do you get people to understand the why, the how, and the what? So what if you report the fact that you've got an undiverse workforce? So what if you report that there is a gender pay gap? It's actually what happens with the data. Why is it important? Why is it really relevant? In as much as when you ask somebody, you know, if you ask somebody to, you know, in certain territories, for example, you cannot ask people to disclose their ethnicity, for example. So in somewhere like the UK, if you're asking somebody to disclose their background, they might be reticent to do that. And so I think you have to. I actually saw a really interesting video with the Food Standard Agency, the chair, talking about why it's really important that we need people to disclose who they are, because actually it enables us to gather the data points, completely sort of anonymous with no traceability, to then think through the talent pool that we need to arrive at decision making. And if you look at it, it was really fascinating for me, because I thought in business that we're not really thinking about like that. And yet, if I look in different environments and different industries and different constructs, it's about actually the why as to what you're doing, the how, the what, but also, and this is really important, if, for example, you've never really thought about all of the economy's talents in your organisation, and all of a sudden you only focus on the difference, then the people who've never really, I suppose, been advantaged or feel included, all of a sudden feel left out. And so congratulations, you've just included a different type of exclusion. And so I really feel that if you're going to introduce something like this, you know, I think about the quote, I can't remember if it was Corn Ferry or whoever. I was talking about this at a board meeting, but, you know, the number one goal for a CEO is to create value creation. And you do that through growth, right? But you grow through diversification, and you grow through sort of diversification, your revenue stream, through innovation. And innovation requires diversity, whether that is cognitive diversity, whether it's diversity of thinking, you know, whatever that might be. The reality of it is that if you are going to introduce any type of change, any type of disclosure, whether that's mandatory or not, you have to sell that into your people. And then you have to be clear why it matters to your organization and why it matters from a societal element. And I think that actually large companies, you know, and the legacy companies do this really well. But even if you're a small company, even if you're a university, you know, you have a civic mission, you have a responsibility. We can climb and we can lift. And we can cherry pick a rainbow of talent from all walks of life, whether you've served in the military, whether you are, from a difficult socioeconomic background, whether you are born into money, and that is an invisible privilege. That is, it is a lottery where you are born, who you are born into, and the moment in time. So for me, I often think about how you talk about that, and how you sell it into people, because they have every right to be a doubter as to the why you are doing something. Are you doing it for your own bonus, your own metric? They deserve the right. You will have some people who will follow you to the ends of the earth, the evangelists. You will have the doubters. And then you will have the people with the big wooden spoon who won't back you because they fundamentally have walked a different journey, or they don't buy into your new way of thinking. It is your job to make sure that you communicate the why, the how, and the what. And if then people decide they don't wish to follow you, you've got to give them a chance. And if they decide that this isn't for me, but this is actually what the business is being evaluated on, and this is important to the business, then as an organisation, you've got to decide, is that individual the right fit for you? As talent moves through an organisation, it moves out, it moves in, and a bit like a football game, right? That's the way I think about it.
Excellent. I think it kind of takes us back to what you said at the start, but I completely agree in terms of kind of that communication piece. That's kind of management 101, isn't it? And then bringing that into understanding your stakeholders to know what kind of communication will work with them. I mean, do you see, particularly, I guess, from your kind of non-executive director experience, do you think that kind of communication piece is why we're perhaps slowly moving towards more action planning alongside those targets? And so, for example, a number of regulators are kind of looking at keep the targets, but then you also have to explain them as well. That kind of stuff. Do you see that, and do you think that's a positive step, and is that going to kind of deliver the change we're after?
Look, quotas are. It's so interesting. You could argue for and against, and I can do good cop, bad cop for both. Literally, I could argue. I could totally back this, and I can argue against myself. And I think it's really interesting, actually, again, about how you arrive at your judgments. And I think, what do you do when you ask companies, for example, to comply or explain, and they say to you, well, actually, we haven't quite got there with a diverse workforce, a diverse board, or diverse leadership team. They explain, but their explanation is a boilerplate two-liner. How do you deal with that? It's really difficult. Then do you start to think, do you legislate for it? And we can see, right? We can see with, when you have asked, even with sort of gender pay gap reporting, having more women on boards, all that sort of thing, we can see that the absolute mandate around disclosures has changed behaviours. And also what we're starting to see, and I'm really pleased about this, is that people are becoming very deliberate about where they park their talents. And I think that, I said this about a movie called Rocks, who won a British Independent Film Award in 2020, that if people do not see themselves in the movie, they will never write themselves into the script. But in a hybrid world where all of a sudden you could start recruiting talent from all over the place, actually it's quite difficult to dodge that now, to say, well, actually, what do you mean we can't find talent? What do you mean? What about neurodiverse talent? Somebody might have sensory impairments, for example, but might be the most outstanding coder. Where are we looking? Where are we searching? And I think that in a way, and I think that the regulators, I think the UK is doing a really good job of trying to disrupt from within. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And I've spoken to lots of different chairs and lots of different leaders and say, oh, look, Monica, it's really, I'm not just prepared to put anybody onto an organisation just because the regulator says that's what you need to do. But actually, my argument is also you need to be unrelenting in DIY headhunting. You've got to be like a talent scout, right? You've got to, and actually, if somebody says I've got to find somebody who, whether they're female, whether they're neurodiverse, whether they're whatever it is, the reality is, where are you looking? Are you only looking in the UK? or actually talk to me about the talent pipeline and timeline, what you're doing, how you're getting your talent out there to sit on other boards, or, you know, managers stepping up. And, you know, and so I think that in a sense, I'm not a massive fan of quotas, but external quotas. I totally favour disclosures, but I've moved my position on internal quotas. I think a leader can say, do you know what, this is what I want. And these are the behaviours. This is the culture. This is the way we are going to do things around here. Actually, we need the difference in order to get to the innovation. Otherwise, you only have to look at the vaccine. You only have to look at the absolute brilliant minds from all over the world that have been involved. What is that? I mean, it's the beautiful game of science, of advancement. It's just look at football. You look at all the different players, and I mean, this is what I love about it. And in a sense, I think if a leader, you know, a company needs to hold a CEO to account and really sort of support and challenge and enable them, but equally a CEO needs to generate the enabling capacity within the organisation and needs to set out their stall as to what they want from their people and how then they might get there with the executive team. And again, that comes back down to the communications piece. So if you want a diverse workforce, if you want to recruit, you know, from, you know, maybe you started to think about, actually, I really like the idea of a social enterprise and sort of taking people who've previously been homeless and giving them an opportunity. How do I go about this? You know, and then for me, I think when you're thinking about bonuses, you're then thinking about performance and conduct linked to those organizational goals as well as your personal goals. And then that's when the real magic happens. So for me, I do favour internal goals. I think government and regulators can play a great there is a great place for them talking about disclosures. And then the comply and explain means, you know, the reality is that companies can then decide for themselves. What I would say, we saw it this week with Schroders announcing the absolute mandate, particularly around FTSE 100, that you have to have a sort of a combination of difference on your board. Otherwise, they will vote against you. At the end of the day, you know what? That's for companies to decide. They're managing billions of pounds worth of assets. If that's fundamental to their thinking around groupthink and risk taking, then that is absolutely right for the organisation to do. Whether the regulators do that is different. But then how organisational leaders and managers think, and managers are really fundamental here, right? Because they sit between. So if a manager decides, well, you know, you've got so much power. And I think sometimes people don't realise that. And I don't think managers should be scared to go to HR or go and talk to senior leaders to say, look, I want to start thinking about how I might recruit in a different way, or where we might find talent. There's no correlation between academic performance necessarily and work performance. You know, so how do I disrupt this? What can I do? What's in my power? What's in my gift? And then go sort of spread your magic dust and try. And that's all you can do.
Perfect. Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to come back to that point about managers in a second. I will just redo my little piece of housekeeping. It is fantastic to see the engagement in the chat. So please do keep dropping the comments. We'll try to get through any questions we can at the end of the session. Lovely to see some friendly faces in there. I would then also say, if you're not already a member of CMI, please do, there should be a link in the chat. Join as a subscriber, as a friend, keep up to date with upcoming Leading Light sessions and our hundreds of thousands of CPD resources to help you with your management. So building on that point there, Monica, I was going to ask you about kind of, I guess it's that communications piece again. It's possibly also about having difficult conversations. I am sure that there are managers listening today who, with the best will in the world, perhaps haven't engaged with that inclusion piece within their workplace yet. Either not feeling confident to do so, or not feeling that they are fluent in the language of those discussions. I mean, what would you say to someone that is either kind of that is reticent to get involved at the moment? Do you think that's a wider problem that organizations need to solve, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a brilliant question again, Will, and you know, when I was thinking about fluency and language, you know, if you just take yourself back right to school. I did French and Spanish, and badly. And
Same.
yeah, and I used to read my Tricolor, and oh god, it was dreadful. But actually, I really wanted to speak French. I think it's such a beautiful language, and you had to learn, right? You had to learn how to articulate yourself. You had to learn how to construct conversations and sentences and grammar. And whilst we may have the grammar, whilst we may have a lot of the construction, actually, the reality of it is this for lots of people is a new language. And it is even, I mean, it is for me. I think because actually there are, you know, I'm not a fan of labels, but actually some people do like labels. And so how you address somebody, how you talk about something, putting yourself out there, again, that sort of element of safety means that it's when you know you can easily offend somebody, frankly, why are you going to put yourself out there? Why? And I think the absolute role of organisations is to have a very safe and deliberate place. You know, the great thing is there are some brilliant tools, right? There's some fantastic books, there's some fantastic videos. And, you know, I often get asked to come in and speak to organisations about how do you talk about these sensitive topics. Well, actually, again, goes back to about enabling capacity. It's about how you learn to think, how you form your judgments, what mental models do you have, where do they come from? And how you learn to become more self-aware and confident with the language that you use. And so I think that there is absolutely a responsibility that sits squarely on the shoulders of organisations to help facilitate that language development and that fluency and that safety. But I also think that there is an obligation on individuals themselves. We're all leaders, right? We're all leading something. We self-lead all the time. And so the one thing I always talk about is to never have an over-reliance. I think we talked about this very early on, actually, when you approached me for the advisory council. But I said it's really important not having an over-reliance on your organisation for your development. Nobody is going to care more about your career than you. Nobody. And why should they? I mean, they will up to a point to advantage an organisation. And if you're really lucky and you've got an outstanding boss, they'll really put you front and centre. But actually, that's quite rare in the great scheme of things. So I think that actually, if, for example, you may think that I don't really think this has got anything to do with me. Well, it is really, because actually difference, cognitive diversity helps you form your judgments around solutions, around delivery. We are in the world of AI. If we don't have different people, you know, helping us think through some of the challenges and the solutions and the answers, then we're at risk of developing that in a homogenous way. When we really do need that rainbow of talent, I think, who've totally walked different journeys. So I think that it is about going on a journey yourself. It is going on a journey with the company. And if the company isn't bothered, or if the company doesn't feel like they've got the money right now to do this, there's tons of free tools out there. And actually build out what I think is your own personal boardroom of advisors. Have different friends. Just look around. What are your friends like? Are they all the same age? Are they all the same type? Have they perhaps gone to a very similar school? Do you broadly eat a lot of the same things? Are they the same colour? I mean, I think about it. I think about the reverse mentoring for me. Where does my input come from? You know, who's in my network? Who's the kind of company that I keep personally and professionally? And it's really helped me, Will. It's really helped me become, well, I think I'm a better version of myself than I was last year, and I hope next year to be the same, because that's the human growth aspect. So I think actually having an environment within your organisation that is safe, and if you can't create that, go and create it elsewhere. Don't give the power to your company. Don't gift them that, right? They have a certain amount, but my goodness, do you have vast amounts in within your own remit, your own gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's probably, I mean, I've only ever known a world with LinkedIn, but obviously tools like that make it kind of easier to develop that network, to speak to people that perhaps you would never usually, you wouldn't be able to do in the past. And I might put a cheeky plug in there and say that kind of professional bodies are a fantastic place to find
Absolutely.
networks with others.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly, but it's also, let me just flip this. If I were in an interview and somebody was interviewing me and they were going to say, well, actually, Monica, can you talk to us about diversity and your view? And actually, I would say, well, my view is that how do I arrive at my view? That's really important for me. And I am very deliberate about subscribing to organisations like the CMI, who I also choose to befriend, but also I choose to learn. It's only a point of view that they offer, but it's really helpful for me to form my worldview. So actually, then I can bring that back into the workplace. And by the way, let me evidence to you what I've done as a result of that. This wasn't through the organisation, it's something I opted into. And that right there, if that doesn't tell you how committed I am to my leadership, my development, my furtherance, but ultimately the furtherance of others to build a better organisation, to build a better society, then do you know what? If the company doesn't value it, don't park your talents there.
Perfect. I think that's fantastic advice. So just looking at the clock, so we've got just over 10 minutes left. I wanted to get a couple of questions in about COVID and the experience of the pandemic before we close up. So I will put it straight to you. What have you learned about your own kind of leadership style and the way that you manage others throughout the experience of the pandemic?
I think what I've realised, there've been some really difficult conversations over the last couple of years, partly because they're just not conversations that you should have on a video screen. You just shouldn't have them over video. They're really difficult conversations, better had face to face over a cup of tea, ideally a piece of cake or a glass of wine or whatever it is that floats your boat. I love all of it. That's the problem. That's my first mistake. And I think that what I suppose I think I've really learnt about myself is that there've been really difficult moments, and perhaps a younger version of me, even a couple of years ago, I would have been quicker to arrive at my judgments. I suppose I would have taken a position more quickly. And the higher up you go, the more skillful often your opponents. Not always, but more often than not. And actually what I've realised is that now when somebody says something that I don't necessarily agree with, I absolutely have my gut instinct and I back that and I listen to that. But I also question why I have the view that I have, but also why somebody else has that view, what's in it for them personally and professionally. And I think that the pandemic has really made me think about that even more, but it's also made me far more forgiving. And I'm just going slower in order to go faster because I just don't know what is going on for somebody. And actually a video screen is difficult. You can't pick up the cues. And so, somebody might have just had a really bad day, and somebody might just be, just arrive. And actually when you come into work, when you physically come into work and you've got your work attire on and you're almost putting your armory on, right? But if you just come from upstairs and you just come downstairs, maybe you haven't had a chance to put your armory on, and maybe you just don't have, you haven't changed gears. Maybe you're still stuck in the gear. So I think that I have learned that actually at this time of uncertainty, it is exhausting to arrive at your judgments a bit more slowly, to be a bit more questioning, to be a bit more probing. It's the notion of the better the question, the better the answer. And I suppose that ultimately we are far more stronger than we realise. And, the reality is if you hire good people, they get on and do the job. Surprise, surprise, no matter where they work. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And kind of to build on that point then, do you think as a society, we have a greater understanding of better management and leadership, having been through the past 18 months of those difficult conversations via video? I mean, do you think the stock of managers has gone up at all over the course of the pandemic?
I think yes, actually, the answer is because I think that, like I said earlier, I think before employees had a job and now they have a voice. And I think that people, whatever your thoughts around the Great Resignation and, the amount of people who've decided that they really love their work, but they also love their life and they value their life. And, people are not working from home. They're working from home through a crisis that continues. And this is going to evolve, whatever that looks like, whether it's hybrid, whether you go back to in-work, whatever that is. If this is, this will continue to change. We go forwards, we go backwards, and that's where we are, and that's the reality. And I think that managers have realised that you can't necessarily see your people anymore. You can't see their productivity. And, I know somebody who, they've got one of these apps or something on their computer where you're on Slack or whatever it is, and you can see how often you're logged in or not. And actually he created a little device that moved his mouse. He's a bit of an event. He moved his mouse, right, every sort of 20 minutes or so. Well, he worked the system, right? And I know somebody else who worked a double job during the pandemic. The employer didn't know. And I think the reality is, actually, whether we like it or not, managers have less power in the sense of physically being able to see somebody and sort of look over their shoulder, both good and bad. And so I think that managers have had to think about how regularly they check in with their people, because I honestly think that people and staff or employees are using their voice more. There is a war on talent, and all of a sudden there are lots more jobs because people are recruiting more widely. So all of a sudden, if you had to be in London and I couldn't recruit somebody from Nottingham, I now can. And so I think that actually managers are having to up their game. Those who were doing it really well before, actually it's just been brilliant. They just think about coming together and using that more favourably, and they are listening. They're more empathetic. They have to, and if they don't, then actually they are starting to be called out. I mean, I just talking to a leader yesterday, and she said, "I've got a brilliant general counsel. 3 of his team have resigned in the last 2 weeks. There's something going on." I mean, there is something going on, and I know exactly what's going on. It's because he didn't really give us stuff. And, the truth of it is that you're paid to know a lot. And I'm afraid once you're in that position, you need to care a lot. You need to care about their productivity. You need to care about their well-being. And if you don't, at some point you get found out. And I would always say, play to your strength. If you really don't want to go and lead people, then find a job that, if you can, enables you to do what you want to do, that enables you to get the substance, if you can get the salary and the symbolism, find a role that plays to what you are and who you want to be, not what just the organisation wants and needs you to be, because at some point you will derail. And that's not the greatest time. I mean, you can go to a coach then, of course you can, but you want this coaching, if you can, to be about performance enhancing, not necessarily just derailment.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, Monica, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've got 5 minutes left. I've seen a fantastic question from the audience. I'm just going to slip in because it's very timely. And then we'll just do, there's 2 questions I'd like to end on. But so Sean asks why there isn't more effort to include people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Poverty includes all the genders and ethnicity. And so obviously the next meeting we'll be meeting in January to speak about socioeconomic background with the advisory council. I wonder, what is your feeling? Do you think this is kind of the next big focus that companies are going to be thinking about? How do they diversify their socioeconomic background of their staff?
Absolutely. And look, it's not an easy conversation to have. And I think this is what's really important. So thank you, Sean, for that question. But, I'd also say to you, well, if I make you CEO for a month, help me, what are your thoughts on this? And this is where the real power of management and leadership comes in. And you can ask your people, help me think this through. How do we enable people? What is the purpose of our company, but also what is our societal role? And we all have one. And I think that companies are starting to think about this. Whatever your views on government, and they're always changing, right? At some point you'll live long enough, you'll see different people in power. But what stays the same for me is what role do companies play? And sometimes that might shift. It certainly feels that right now. If you feel in moments that the government has abdicated or they're prioritising something else, actually it doesn't mean that you don't have to prioritise this. And I think that it's definitely coming down the line. I think, government are talking about the levelling up agenda. Was certainly a big part of it for us, for the advisory council. I'm really excited because I don't think these were conversations we were having before. And look, and I know you're going to ask me this question, but I think really strongly we are a small island. Feels like a bit smaller since Brexit, whatever your view. We're competing against a very, very skilled world with incredible technological advancement that is overwhelming. We have to use all of the economy's talents. I'm really excited that we have this chance to do that. And we've got to do that thinking through education. We've got to do that through health. We've got to do that through work, giving people purpose, because that is the prosperity of a nation. And so yes, I do feel it is a brilliant moment. So thank you for that excellent question, Sean.
Perfect. Well, yeah, Monica, as you say, I've got 2 questions I want to finish on. This one is a nice, easy one. What would a better, fairer society look like to you, and how do we get there?
Look, a better, fairer society to me is there's the role of government as to their view, but governments will change, right? And I think that to some extent they often feels like they just plan a 4-year cycle, right, until the next election. And I think that great if they're looking longer term, but I think companies also have an incredible responsibility as to what do you want to be known for. Why do individuals want to come and park their talents? Who do you serve? And if you can be really clear about why you think your organisation is fair, why it is inclusive, and you can evidence that, then my God, you have a chance simply from a competitive point of view of attracting the best talent. And if I were a manager or I were a leader right now, I'd be thinking about how do I steal market share from rivals? How do I disrupt from within? How do I disrupt externally? But I'd also be thinking, the power that I have to make this society, the internal environment in which I am directly responsible, a fairer place. And I can then evidence that, and I can talk about it, or I can write about it, or I can do whatever. But then you live your life. It's the richest of life, and you can look back and you say you've done your bit. So that's how I think about it.
Perfect. And my final question, do you have like one message that you would kind of give to the managers and leaders today, one piece of advice, kind of what do you want everyone to leave this session thinking about now for the next week?
Sometimes I put on the news and I think we are really starting to become quite tribal, and it's really dangerous. And Sean said it in his question. This is quite simply for me about using all of the economy's talents. This is to me about being unrelenting in your DIY headhunting. Always be looking out for people. None of us will rise as high as our talents allow because we don't get an opportunity to do lots of different things. That's just often not the way work is. But we are going into an environment where young people have to think about multiple careers. It's so exciting. They will do so many roles that don't exist yet. And so actually read widely, think around the competencies that your job requires, understand your area of business, but just read about business books, read about philosophy, read about why do people in the army serve, for example, and get a medal for bravery. And sometimes in business we get a bonus. I mean, look at the parallels. I'm not saying one is right and younger, but you can learn so much from looking at different constructs, different industries. And then it's a bit like Bake Off, right? You've got the broad principles, but then go and bake your own cake. Put your ingredients in. If you want to add the pistachio, if you just like the vanilla kind, whatever it is. And then you can then tell your own story. And I sense that that is the way. The worst thing we can do is start pitting ourselves against each other. We need to lift everybody. We're a small country, I mean, a small population relative to others, going into a very difficult geopolitical time. Live your life knowing that you have done the best by yourself, enable yourself, absolutely back yourself, don't have an over-reliance of the company, enable others, and then you can write the next chapter of your career knowing that, you know what, it's been a great dance.
Monica, I love it. That is a beautiful rallying cry that your career is in your hands. Take your development, own it, and as you say, choose where you park your talents.
Absolutely, and you know, join companies like this, the CMI, and look, none of us are being paid for this. This is really important work, and then use it to your advantage when you go into an interview, because that's what I'd do.
Perfect, fantastic. Look, thank you so much for your time. This hour has flown by. I hope the audience has enjoyed this as much as I have. Please do like and subscribe to and share this video on LinkedIn and YouTube. Get Monica's message out. If you're not already a member of CMI, please do subscribe to hear about our future Leading Lights interviews and the work of the 75th Advisory Council. And in the meantime, thank you again, Monica, and I hope everybody watching today has a fantastic rest of the week and a restful Christmas.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, I really appreciate it, and happy Christmas all. Thank you for listening.
Perfect. Cheers. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.